Well, I'm very pleased to welcome all of you to Fresno State. I'm Saúl Jiménez-Sandoval. I know it's a mouthful. I'm the president at Fresno State, and it's my distinct honor to welcome all of you to this, your campus, Fresno State. Our mission at Fresno State is about community, and it's about how it is that we impact community on the everyday basis. And within that, of course, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, or SGMA, as it is called nowadays, is very important to Fresno State. We are deeply aware that water produces crops in our valley. Over 250 commodities of crops that the San Joaquin Valley produces constitute 25% of our nation's food. That's 25% of the nation's food that cannot, I'm going to repeat that cannot be produced elsewhere. We do not have other regions of the country or of the world waiting to produce what we produce, and therefore it is more important in that case that we resolve the water issue in order to secure our nation's food. Before this overwhelming challenge, of course, also comes the overwhelming challenge of climate change as well. And with overwhelming challenges, of course, also come great opportunities. I'm very pleased that we are coming together to imagine, to reimagine how it is that this Central Valley of ours is going to move forward in a proactive, focused, intentional way. And I'm very grateful for all the incredible work and the partnership amongst the California Water Institute. Of course, the Central Valley Community Foundation. Ashley Swearengin is here. I want to thank her for everything she does, not only for Fresno State and not only for our valley, but also for California, and for the PPIC Water Policy Center as well. With that, I want to welcome you to Fresno State, and I want to welcome Ashley Swearengin to the podium.
All right, thank you so much, President Jiménez-Sandoval. Good morning, everyone. You know, it's pretty cool to be here with you all, I have to say. Just reflecting as I was parking and walking over here, and I was thinking about probably literally the thousands of times that I've walked on this campus, whether it was as a student, a former staffer here at the Office of Community and Economic Development, as a parent of a high school student that went to University High School, and then walking into this building today and considering what this gathering represents for all of us who are gathered, everyone we represent, and the many, many thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions of people whose interests are represented here today. It's a pretty big deal. And it's really special that Fresno State would host this convening. Thank you, President Sandoval, for everything you've done to make this our region's home. This institution is really special to all of us, and particularly at the Central Valley Community Foundation, where our mission and our vision, we envision a Central Valley with no barriers and just opportunity for all the people who live here. And we know that having an adequate water supply for our economy, for our residents, and for our environment kind of is an important thing for us to figure out. And I've been doing similar work in the Central Valley for about 25 years now, community and economic development. And at CVCF, we really know that there are 4 things needed for us to have big, positive, and lasting change in this region. And if you don't see these 4 ingredients included and embedded in these big problem-solving kinds of efforts, then you can pretty much guarantee that you're going to miss out in some way or another. But the first ingredient for big and lasting change, in my experience and in all the work we do at CVCF, is you got to have everybody at the table. You got to bring people together. And there are a lot of ways in which the stakeholders who are represented here today come together. There's got to be a place where, you know, like it or not, people you like, people you don't, everyone affirms, yep, everyone involved in finding solutions to these big problems are represented in this configuration. And I see that in this room today, number 1. Number 2, you have to have a smart, investable plan. Ideas mean nothing if they are not accompanied with plans, specific detail that can on paper show us how we get from where we are today to our desired, different, and positive future. Those kinds of plans are so informed and lifted up by what PPIC has provided for us. Like, this is really an essential ingredient to finding lasting solutions for our region. The third thing you got to do is, once you've got a detailed plan, and hopefully you've held your coalition together, step one, bring everybody together. Step two, get the plans figured out. Step three, we have to be serious about fundraising and funding at scale the implementation of these plans. Now is not a time to be bashful or shy or small-minded about the big investment that is needed in the Central Valley as we deal with the impact of Sigma and so many other constraints, challenges, and even opportunities. Like, don't be afraid of the price tag, is my view. Because if we can prove on paper that something's gonna work, and if people buy in to these proposed plans, we can find the money. Resources flow behind agreement, reconciliation, and innovation. So if we can pull those things together, we'll unlock the resources. And then lastly, an essential ingredient and also a key role that PPIC helps to play is evaluation, measuring, course correction, making sure as we're implementing that things are going according to plan and holding ourselves accountable to that plan. So I lift up those four things today to say at CVCF, we see those ingredients happening in different levels in the work that you all embody. So we are very pleased to be a sponsor and a supporter of your efforts to tackle this big challenge for the Valley. Last thing I want to say is thank you so much to PPIC for leaning in and dedicating so much time and resource and expertise to this big challenge of Sigma and ensuring a secure water future for the Central Valley. I've been hearing about, even in the middle of COVID, even in a Zoom world, this body of work has been talked about for years. Like, I hear about this all the time, everywhere. So to the PPIC team, you guys have really done an incredible job. And last thing I actually do want to make sure to mention as well is thank you to the sponsors who just helped us cover the costs of this work and bringing everyone together today. So thank you to the Environmental Defense Fund, the Nature Conservancy, the Turlock Irrigation District, the Blueprint for the San Joaquin Valley, Western Growers Association, and Wolf Farming. Appreciate your contributions here today. So thank you so much and have a great day.
All right, welcome. My name is Andrew Ayres, and I'm an assistant professor of economics at the University of Nevada, Reno, and a research fellow with PPIC. Today, I'm going to be walking you through the basics of our report, and afterwards, there will be some panels for discussion. The first thing I'd like to do is thank the supporters of this work. So that includes the Babbitt Center of Land and Water Policy at the Lincoln Institute for Land Policy, the S.D. Bechtel Jr. Foundation, California Department of Food and Ag, the California Strategic Growth Council and its Climate Change Research Program, and finally, the USDA Secure Water Future Grant at UC Merced. I'd also like to thank the event sponsors, again, building on what Ashley had to say, as well as Fresno State and the CVCF. So up on the screen now, you'll see the report team from PPIC. Over the past 3 years, everybody on the screen right now has been involved in the project in one way or another. But it wasn't just us. Other project partners took part, again, on a series of reports culminating in the one that we're talking about today over the past 3 years. And finally, there's no way that we could have done all of this without the benefits we got from the input from a very broad advisory group. Beyond those names on the screen, there were also many, many others who took part in targeted workshops as well as reviewed reports for us. And you'll be able to hear from some of those on the screen right now in today's later panels. So without further ado, I'll jump right in. Overpumping of groundwater in the San Joaquin Valley has created problems in the past, and that's why Sigma implementation is going to be key for supporting livelihoods and agriculture in the San Joaquin Valley moving forward. Top of mind for many in SGMA implementation is bringing new supplies to the valley to help reduce the deficits in water availability in the future. But even with those new supplies, we estimate that at least 500,000 acres of currently irrigated agriculture will have to come out of production. Those lands coming out of production could, if not managed well, pose a risk. They could pose economic risks, public health risks, and other environmental risks as well. So our goal with this project has been twofold. So first, to understand what are the opportunities and challenges for alternative land uses on these lands, as well as, in doing so, thinking about what are the funding, incentive, and institutional considerations that will be needed to make sure that these alternatives and solutions are really self-sustaining and cost-effective moving forward. From this report, we have a few key takeaways. The first is that, again, even with some new supplies, a lot of land is going to have to come out of production in the valley, and water trading is going to be crucial for helping to manage that scarcity moving forward. Smart farmland transitions will help avoid some of the worst potential outcomes that could arise from taking this land out of production, and also generate new benefits for the valley. New partnerships, especially between managers in different sectors, will be important for making this a success. And finally, this is going to take some money and potentially also some reform. This will require investments, and also we identified some regulations that could be revisited or updated for a SGMA future. Now I'll talk a little bit about the water scarcity coming to the valley that's going to drive some of this fallowing, and how trading of water could change that picture. On the screen now, you'll see 3 maps of the San Joaquin. On the left-hand side, you'll see the expected water cutbacks that we anticipate by 2040, and these are coming from 3 sources. So the first is SGMA. The second is reductions in some surface water availability from new environmental flow proposals on some tributaries in the valley. And the third is climate change, primarily here made up of increased evaporative demands. All told, these cutbacks total about 20% of applied water in the valley. In the central map, you'll see current surface water supplies in local areas throughout the valley. The purple is where there's not a lot of surface water. And this is essentially what folks have today. And on the right-hand side, you'll see a map of crop distributions between annual and perennial crops, showing there in green where you have what tend to be the more profitable crops in the valley. Those perennials cover about 60% of the current irrigated acreage. So here you'll see 2 figures. On the left, reductions in applied water availability. And that gray or black line represents sort of the aggregate or the sum of all 3 of those cutback sources: SGMA, climate change, and new environmental flows. In the middle, it shows for those 3 scenarios, losses in agricultural GDP. So that black line in the middle totals about $4.5 billion of lost GDP by 2040 per year. That's about 2.3% of the regional economy in the San Joaquin Valley. And what's not shown on the slide is that that also entails about 50,000 lost jobs. One other thing to note is that we differentiate here between losses in crop production and other downstream sectors such as dairy and other processing industries. So in response to this, we considered what would happen if you started trading water. That gray line represents a no trading scenario, so people are working with what they've got after the cutbacks. Here we have 3 new bars showing 3 trading scenarios. The first is local trading, where essentially people are able to trade surface water and groundwater in new groundwater markets with their neighbors. The next is basin trading, where you can trade water with everybody within your groundwater subbasin. And finally, the green line is valley trading, where groundwater stays local within a basin, but surface water can move all the way throughout the valley. The two key takeaways are that trading water doesn't reduce the cutbacks that need to be made. This isn't going to reduce fouling, but it is going to make it less costly. So across scenarios, the total costs of adapting to this new scarcity could be reduced by anywhere from about 1/3 to 50%. We also consider some other scenarios that involve bringing new water to the valley. So here you'll see in blue 2 different scenarios where we consider whether the valley is able to bring in an additional 500,000 acre-feet in supplies or up to 1 million. This, in contrast to trading, does reduce the amount of cutbacks that will be needed in applied water and therefore also the amount of fallowing. In general, this will improve conditions in the valley. We also consider some scenarios where increased productivity can help to offset these losses as well, and you can read more about those in the report. On the next slide, I'll show a few maps of how trading could shape where fallowing happens in the valley, and I'll note right now that those scenarios, those maps, are reflecting the scenarios with water trading, but no new water, okay? So this is full demand management. Here we go with 4 slides of the San Joaquin, and on the left, you'll see our no trading scenario, and moving across to the right, increasingly flexible trading, all the way up to moving surface water throughout the valley. One of the key takeaways here is that on the left, there are quite a few areas with very concentrated fallowing in red. As you move to the right, there are fewer of those. In essence, being able to trade water in some ways spreads out the fallowing across the valley, and also it reduces the cost by allowing that water to move to the more profitable crops. There's been a lot of discussion about water trading under SGMA, and our project advisors really highlighted these concerns for us, and we took those to heart. In particular, both groundwater pumping and fallowing that comes about due to SGMA can have negative consequences for the valley and its communities. To be more specific, shifting groundwater use, shifting pumping, could cause undesirable results in places that water and pumping effort moves to. And on the fallowing side, shifts in this fallowing could have unintended consequences for local communities. We considered a range of potential impacts, including impacts to drinking water wells and subsidence. And on the fallowing side of things, potential increases in dust exposure in rural communities, impacts to the dairy industry, and how fallowing would be distributed across farms of different sizes, including small farms. The bottom line is that managing water scarcity is a balancing act, and trading water in practice is tricky. Careful design is going to be needed in the development of new groundwater markets, but trading can help reduce the negative impacts of these transitions. And I'll also note here that the endeavor of implementing SGMA, addressing overdraft, and reducing groundwater use deficits is going to go a long ways by itself towards addressing some of the negative impacts of pumping that we've seen in the past decades. This is really important to get right, because for trading to have a strong foundation and to play a positive role, these issues can't be ignored. Trading rules need to track and address the significant impacts that moving groundwater around or shifting fallowing could have. And when it comes to trading rules, they need to be transparent, flexible, and they need to foster market access for all players, including smaller farms. One example of a new type of rule that might be implemented in groundwater markets is to consider no or limited buy zones in sensitive areas designed to sort of limit or address acute impacts of pumping. So for example, this could be used to avoid subsidence near critical infrastructure. Again, it's going to be really important to get these rules right, especially when critical infrastructure for drinking water or water conveyance is at risk. On the fallowing side of things, also, it could be worthwhile to consider transitional assistance for areas affected by these shifts in fallowing, including potentially in the dairy industry or in some counties in particular. So we've talked a little bit about the water scarcity that will be driving fallowing in the future and how trading could shift the landscape of fallowing. But what are promising options for things to do with that land when it does come out of production and doesn't have a lot of water available to it? We considered 5 different alternative land uses: solar development, water-limited cropping, upland habitat restoration, the construction of recharge basins, and new housing development. And we did all of this with an eye towards identifying opportunities for multiple benefits. These new land uses are going to have to deliver on some key outcomes. First, they're going to have to provide ongoing control of dust, weeds, and other pests. And ideally, they'll also be able to support economic activity or other local benefits. In doing so, they should also aim to be cost-effective and, where they can be, also self-sustaining. So there's also been a bit of discussion about prioritizing buffers around rural communities in the valley for fallowing and for these land transitions. And in this report, we didn't go into great detail about that because we have some concerns about the cost effectiveness and feasibility of that approach for providing self-sustaining solutions. However, we do understand, of course, that these land transitions need to be beneficial for communities. And there are many opportunities there. But those opportunities to be realized will require new investments in infrastructure, workforce training, and innovative practices, which we'll explore on the next few slides. I'm sure many of you know this, but the San Joaquin is a very sunny place. And you can see here in the map on the right-hand side of this slide, that means that actually most of the valley is quite suitable for utility-scale solar development, at least from the sun perspective. But not all that land will end up in solar. Even with the ambitious climate and renewable energy goals of the state of California, some projections suggest that about 135 to 215,000 acres of land could be necessary in order to meet renewable energy goals. This could be very advantageous in that solar can provide sustained revenues from the land, opportunities for effective land management moving forward, and job opportunities for valley communities. The key bottlenecks here are transmission. So there needs to be a way to get that energy out of the valley, and we don't currently have all of that today that we need. And beyond that, workforce development is a high priority. Although it's true that an existing solar field doesn't require a lot of jobs, we believe that there's going to be a pipeline for developing new utility-scale solar projects in the valley for 2 decades or more, and that can provide an opportunity for high-paying and secure jobs. The next land use alternative we considered was water-limited cropping. And so you'll see here on the map areas marked in brown that we believe could be suitable for water-limited cropping with supplemental irrigation of perhaps 4 inches or 8 inches. Those lands cover about 3.2 million acres in the valley. And if this is successful, I should say, even though pure dry land is probably too risky in most of the valley, with just this small amount of supplemental irrigation, you can keep these lands in production with using much less water. These lands could provide, again, revenue potential on the land, ongoing opportunities for land management to control dust, pest, and weeds, and they can be flexibly integrated with more intensively irrigated agriculture. In terms of the market for these crops, especially if sigma fallowing sort of dries up current forage opportunities for dairies, we believe there could be an opportunity for these dryland crops to sort of fill that hole. But there are challenges and things we need to do. So first of all, we need increased R&D on what varieties are really going to work well for this type of water-limited agriculture in the San Joaquin. And you're going to need to basically be able to access those supplemental supplies. People will need to be willing to use 4 to 8 inches in order to establish these crops. The next major land use alternative we considered was upland habitat restoration. So on the map here, you'll see potentially quite advantageous sites for new restoration in areas that are adjacent to existing conserved areas, either desert or wetland habitat. All in all, this totals about 1.1 million acres of irrigated farmland in the valley. And the advantages here are that this additional conservation can help mitigate extensive historic habitat loss, and the requirements for this land are quite low. Upland habitat doesn't require a lot of water. But success will require first reducing the costs of this type of conservation, which today is kind of expensive, and identifying suitable entities to manage these lands moving forward. Finally, you'll also have to set up legal protections for landowners as well as for neighboring plots in case endangered species do come and take roost. Moving on, we can talk about recharge basins. The valley has about 50,000 acres of dedicated recharge basin today. Most of these recharge basins are not currently managed for habitat, but the Kern Water Bank does provide an example and a model for how that could be done in the future. However, as recharge ramps up in the valley, it's likely that spreading water, flood flows over existing farm fields is going to be less costly than building new dedicated recharge basins. And you'd also need additional legal protections for these basins. So, the scope for expansion of dedicated recharge basins is not huge. We estimate it could be maybe 20 to 40,000 acres across the valley. And although that's not a lot in total, that could be very important locally. New development for housing is also another land use that is not likely to take up a lot of acreage across the valley, but could be important locally. So the San Joaquin has been one of the fastest growing regions in the state, and that's likely to continue with about 800,000 new residents by 2040. I'll note that that's the most recent projection from the California Department of Finance, but it's very uncertain given COVID and other demographic factors in the state. The important part is that if these developments go in on top of existing agriculture, on net they would use a lot less water than that currently irrigated agriculture does. So using some estimates of household water use that we generated in previous projects specifically for the valley, we estimate that this new development could potentially take up 50,000 acres of land, and in doing so save about 175,000 acre feet per year. So now we've talked about water scarcity in the future, how trading can shape those outcomes, and what the alternatives are for fallowed lands. But how exactly do we get to sustainable water and land use in the valley? We have some recommendations. The first is that we're going to need improved coordination. And this is especially true both for recharge and for trading, where you're going to need coordination across neighboring basins in order to do that well. In terms of investments, on the water side, we'll need new conveyance, both for recharge and trading, moving water around the valley. And on the energy side, we're going to need coordination across sectors that maybe haven't worked closely before in order to make sure transmission planning gets done well. I've covered most of the important parts on water trading moving forward, but just to reiterate, we're going to need careful new development of groundwater markets, as well as smart expansion of surface water markets throughout the valley. SGMA was passed in 2014, but many of the relevant regulations for water and land use were created long before then. We considered things like dust management regulations, permitting issues, and Williamson Act contracting, and we've identified some areas where those could be helpfully revisited or updated. This is an area where counties especially are going to play a big role, especially when it comes to Williamson Act contracting. And this will also take some money. The state and the feds have some programs that could be helpfully expanded, but locals will need to develop some new programs as well. In a later panel, you'll be able to hear from some officials about funding opportunities. I'll end with this. There is a future for agriculture in the San Joaquin Valley, and improved groundwater management will really help to support that. With new and improved coordination, we can avoid some of the biggest negative potential impacts of taking land out of production, and we can generate new benefits throughout the valley. And finally, this endeavor of implementing SGMA is really important for the valley, but it's really important for the state of California as a whole. So I could go on, but with that, I'll invite Alvar Escrivá to the stage, and alongside him, the first panel. Oh, and if you have questions, submit them to ppiceventquestions@gmail.com.